So we've gone fairly over time, and I quite appreciate the patience of our speakers and our attendees. But I would now like to welcome all of the speakers to the floor to turn on their cameras and mics and join us for a Q&A and roundtable discussion, which I will be moderating. We're going to keep it a little bit shorter than originally anticipated due to the high density of interesting presentations today. So I suppose that I'll open it up with a rather general question open to all of our speakers today. So it's very clear based on the shape and nature of the discussions that we've had today that the range of technologies, and especially innovative technologies that are disrupting and making their way into the food industry is increasing. Both in terms of the depth of their penetration and the diversity of technologies. A very clear thread was the impact of digitization and AI in the industry. Would it be fair to say that AI is perhaps the leading driver of change across the board, speaking generally? And do any of you feel that there are other maybe second place front runners besides AI that are really driving disruption these days?
I will open and say that while we do AI CPD, in our case, AI stands for Agile Integrative Computational Protein Design, but actually computational protein design has a deep AI component, or actually more a ML. And I think that the move from AI to ML here is important because artificial intelligence by itself has limited capabilities, and by the robustness of the machine learning part, where you have the bootstrapping and the understanding of the data, you move to a different phase. And in my field, when I began my career, there were less than 3,000 structures. Today, you have so much more. And the protein data banks, so the data itself is booming. And one example for that is the DeepMind company, which was purchased by Google, has revolutionized structure prediction possibilities using ML. And this enables a whole new realm of using the data. Likewise, if we go to precision fermentation, then while it is an old technology that has received a lot of new attention with all the CRISPR on one hand, but also the time it took for strain development, you have companies such as Ginkgo Bioworks and Culture Biosciences and many others that implement robotics, and then the cost of sequencing DNA and writing DNA has went down so much that we are simply in a totally new phase of things. And from the other side, if we want to expand it to the entire food tech space, well beyond precision fermentation, we have a very simple observation. The number of companies in a supermarket have increased significantly. The relative share of the 10 companies that rule 50% of the food and beverage market is actually going down, because it is easier for new companies to come in, whether it is to the supermarket, and even more so if you use digital and social media and ways which you actually don't need, and the entire concept of a supermarket is changing. So definitely this is changing very much, both as to the technology, and following COVID-19, there is also a change of our perception of how to do our purchases, even how to work doing this by Zoom and so on. So definitely a revolution.
Thank you, Ilan. It's a very interesting point that you mentioned, the let's call it demonopolization of the industry being driven by the increasingly democratizing force of AI. AI is both increasingly capable and versatile, but also increasingly accessible to smaller scale operations. And the same could be said about digitization, et cetera. So very well said, a great point. David,
Yeah,
What are your
Franco,
thoughts?
it's a good question because what we're seeing with our multinational partners, Foss and Schneider, is this revolution into near-infrared scanning, and I love the Crover presentation also, just the analytical tools, and I think that we're going to see more of those in food to be able to get more standardization, more consistency, particularly as blockchain enters into what we're doing, so that those sort of analytical technologies will become very important. We use, for example, scanning, near-infrared scanning technology to be able to just monitor the processes during sugar processing, to be able to retain these polyphenols in the sugar. And so I think that those sort of technologies will become more important and more used.
Very well said. Zach, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. So I firstly certainly join Elon in terms of the importance of AI as far as the deep mind kind of narrative is concerned, and the use of data, which is going to be one of the most important things going forward, because data is accumulating and being able to process it in a automated way is important. So it's certainly going to be a new world in terms of that. But what I would also add to the components that we see are developing aggressively also is a blockchain, and in our industry is very much about traceability and the ability for precise verification and for analytical purposes. So the blockchain is certainly something that stands out in our industry, and also as it connects to NFTs. So that's really still an understated area, because it's currently looked upon as something of an artistic kind of narrative, and it's all about art. But I think we're underestimating how quickly it's going to evolve into many other narratives in the next few years. And the one other thing that I would add to it, which really is an all-encompassing thing, because it's going to integrate a lot of these technologies, is what some call meta, or you can call it VR, because ultimately, as we as consumers, as influencers, as business people, went from physical meetings into Zoom world, kind of through a very smooth transition. I don't think many expected that. I think is very much what's going to happen between now and the next few years, that we're going to transition into this meta world very smoothly, and so this connection between offline and online is going to be quite impressive. So AI, blockchain, and meta / VR is what we're seeing is going to be the key drivers.
I couldn't agree more. The metaverse was certainly coming, but the COVID pandemic certainly helped speed that along, certainly with the melting of boundaries between online and physical, etc. And I'm glad that you mentioned blockchain, because that was one of my next questions, both generally and with regards to NFTs. It's true that it's a rather versatile infrastructure that I think we'll see broaden beyond creative and artistic industries into the sorts of things you're talking about. Indeed. Of course, Julia. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I totally agree with Elon. Of course, you cannot underestimate the impact of AI playing the role in any industry that it's involved in. But I just wanted to add that it's only as good as it can be in addition to a human being who's creating it. So I feel like AI is playing an amazing supporting role in any business that it touches. We need to follow the lead, but because of the gap between the traditional food tech industries and the very advanced digitally ones, we see a progression, but I feel like it's very fair to recognize the long way ahead of us. So AI is great and we're on the right path, but it's just in a very baby stage for some parts of the industry.
Very well said, but clearly not as baby as I'm sure a lot of our viewers and attendees might have thought. AI is the quintessential accelerator and democratizer, and it is very apparent that food tech is no exception to that. So yes, that's fantastic. I'd like to present another general question to all of our viewers on how different trends in human behavior in particular are shaping the industry. So it's very clear at this point that Technology is a huge driver of paradigm shifts in approaches and business models within this industry. I would assume that the same can be said about human behavior. And of course, it's a cyclical, reciprocal relationship there. But I'm thinking in terms of, things like health is new wealth. The COVID pandemic has really crystallized in people's minds the notion of health as an asset class unto itself. People are, to a large extent, changing a lot of their habits. Healthy eating, of course, being the most obvious symptom of that. So both with specific regard to that and more generally in terms of human behavior, how do you feel the human side of things as opposed to the technological side of things is shaping disruption in food tech?
You cannot help saying that one of the clear examples of that is sugar overconsumption. Sugar overconsumption is a long-term epidemic, which actually has more victims than COVID-19, but it has been only in the last very few years that things have took over, and actually politicians are favoring sugar tax because there is a demand that comes from consumers. Actually, a known secret of the industry that's a huge sweet beverage industry is going double-digit down in the last decade because people are not willing to just have tasty, they want to have tasty and healthy, and people are beginning to understand that there is here a cyclical thing where on one hand, absurd, on one hand, there is a huge investment in health, and on the other hand, food, and there were here more than one talk about food being thy medicine. Hippocrates said it already as a father of medicine. And we see it with a growing pressure on sugar overconsumption. When I opened the MI, there were less than 20 countries with sugar tax. Today you have over 40, and that's not taking into account all the places where you have just labeling rather than sugar tax, and states within countries which added sugar tax. And this is just one example. COVID-19 made us much more conscientious of what we put into our stomach, and also much more about preventive measures that are needed beyond just treating the disease after it comes about. So I think there is a huge change. There are several small companies, Califia Farms, Nick's Yogurt, I can go on and on with names, that just rode on this notion of sustainability and of healthfulness. And actually in Israel, a small company called SodaStream was bought by PepsiCo for $3.2 billion just because it is more sustainable and more healthy. Actually, the former food CTO of SodaStream is now our VP for food technology and heads our flavor house. So I think really there is a huge trend, tectonic movement, which we are just beginning to grasp, and has very big changes that will appear. And from the other side, you see the open innovation in big companies. When I opened the MI, open innovation in multinationals was something not easy, and many expected to get free samples, were not willing to pay for it. And now there is an active, proactive work of big companies to try and embrace know-how from small companies. And just as an example, the EAT Food organization, which has EU funding, we have two consortiums, one with PepsiCo and Danone and the Technion, one with Maspex, VTT, University of London, University of Aarhus. And this is just the understanding of the European Union that you need such collaborations. And the last sentence, I'll say that we are going to see more Kodak moments. Dean Foods, as the biggest dairy in the United States, have went bankruptcy because they did not adapt to this new world.
Very well said. Yes, there's big changes going on in terms of I'll call it governmental commitment of optimizing population health. Big things happening in sort of the longevity space, which I'm a little bit more familiar with. But we're seeing that emerge as a very big trend, and I would expect food to play a very large part in that because it's such a critical factor in terms of lifestyle associated mortality, life expectancy, health span, etc. David, did you have anything in particular to add to that?
Yeah, I think Alain's right. There's a lot of space now for just to follow consumer behavior, to continue and develop that a little bit more. I think we're seeing, forgive me because this is my age, but we lived through the fat, every fat was bad for you. And then all of a sudden there was this, there's good fats, bad fats. And now the consumers are very clear on, good fats and bad fats. And they've shaped choices and shaped the development and the technology. And I think we're seeing the same sort of thing now settled in sweeteners. That there's every sugar was bad for you, but I mean, a lot of our foods, carbohydrates are in a lot of our foods. There's a lot of natural sweeteners, and I think what we're seeing is the emergence of less processed, brown sugars, more natural intense sweeteners, like what Alain was saying before. I think that there's a real evolution in consumers choosing these less processed, less refined, and more natural options. And so we're seeing a dichotomy in the market. A lot of the big food companies are doing the same thing, choosing these less refined, more consumer-friendly options. It's an interesting trend to watch.
Indeed. Zach, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you have something to add here?
Yes, absolutely. I certainly agree with all of the above. But as far as the human behavior is concerned, one other thing that we'll look at very closely in all our development is cultural shifts, and we have them regularly, obviously over decades, and these cultural shifts are very powerful impactors of a lot of changes and trends within the industry, not only ours, but just across board. And it's interesting because we observe that, one of the ongoing major shifts is, of course, as pointed out previously, is more conscious consumption. And we see this certainly in our industry being driven by technologies, because technologies are allowing our consumers to be more aware, to trace as far as is possible today, to what the product is all about, and how it impacts their health. But then we also see that it kind of the reverse of it, whereby these trends of the human kind of impact drive certain technologies. But one thing that also which hasn't been mentioned as far as the human behavior is concerned, that we're really paying attention to, is the fact that with the impact of technologies and the receding nature of human interaction, which is it seems that is here to stay. And certainly, to your point, none of these trends as far as we're concerned, have been changed by COVID, but they have been fast tracked. So it was kind of going there. It was very obvious, but it's been very much fast tracked. And so in terms of our industry, the consumption is significantly dropping, but it's starting to evolve into experience. And so kind of more aware, more educated consumption that is part of the experience is coming to the forefront, primarily for the very kind of complicated psychological reason, whereby emotion is really coming at a premium more and more so. And this is why when we look at the next 20, 30 years, and it's absolutely clear that technology is going to play the key role, it's almost unimaginable that consumer brands will not, at least those that are willing to thrive, that will not be fully in control of certain technologies that allow them to be direct to consumer facing, versus the current traditional infrastructure, which is very complicated through multi-layer distribution channels and so on. So emotion and becoming at a premium is really making incredible impacts in terms of consumer behavior, as far as we can see, for sure.
Yeah, very well said. And even within the more narrow scope of what you were talking about, emotions, etc., it's part and parcel with a very broad and common theme that I see here today, which is increasing personalization, precision, etc., all the way from branding through technology and beyond. So makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Zach. I wish that we had more time for additional questions, but alas, we've ran over.